Hello class! Here we are in the home stretch of sensory physiology, and we're going to talk about the sense of temperature. So what kind of receptors sense temperature? Do they adapt? And there's kind of a complex adaptation that we see with there's kind of a complex adaptation that we see with temperature, and we will talk about that. We'll talk about the temperature pathway. Again, we're in the anterior lateral pathway with pain. We've learned more about temperature receptors and their transduction channels. Those are the TRP receptors. And temperature does two things for us. It tells us about our world, and it helps us thermoregulate. So, we have two types of temperature, central or core and peripheral temperature. So we have central receptors and peripheral receptors. And we also have both warm and cold types of thermoreceptors. This is in the same pathway, or a parallel pathway to the pain pathway, so in the anterior lateral spinothalamic pathway. And as I said previously, temperature is to help us thermoregulate. If your body's too cold or your body's too warm, you have to do something about it. And it also tells you about what's going on in your environment. This picture is a little skewed, but I want you to realize that we have both cold and warm receptors. So you see, this is temperature in centigrade, so we have a range of cold temperatures, and we have a range of warm temperatures. So we have two separate kinds of receptors, and then you see an intensity. So you know, at the highest intensity we're about 43 degrees or something like that, and the highest intensity we're at 26 degrees or something like that. Notice body temperature is right here in the middle at 37 degrees. Thermoreceptors are mostly tonic, but do exhibit a partial adaptation. So they adapt at first, and then they're like phasic in the beginning and tonic in the end. Why is that a good thing? Because we want to detect changes in temperature, but we want to have a constant report of what the temperature is, and the combination of adaptation enables us to do both. So the receptors in thermoreceptors are called TRP, which stands for transient receptor channels. These are interesting because they're part chemoreceptor and part mechanoreceptor. We have different kinds of receptors for cold and warmth. So for the warmth receptors, those are a TRP type of channel. It's called a TRP V3, and they respond to the environment around them, and they respond to some chemicals, and the chemical the warm receptors respond to is camphor. So some of those rubs and whatnot, you put those on and you get a warm feeling. Well, you're depolarizing those warm receptors. Now, we have another variety of TRP, and let me see if I can think of what those are. TRP, I want to say M8. And do I care if you're remembering all of those things? Just TRP is good enough for me. And again, these respond to cold, but they also respond to menthol. And menthol, if you have like menthol cough drops, there's like a cooling sensation. That's because they're affecting your cold receptors. So these are transduction channels. So either with warmth or cold, or with camphor and menthol, you open up transduction channels, sodium comes in, it depolarizes the receptor. If it gets your axon hillock to threshold, then you're going to have a frequency of action potentials traveling down the axon. So these central and peripheral receptors, we have some in the brain, we have some in the spinal cord, around the spinal cord, in the deep veins. Those are telling us about core temperature. We have peripheral receptors. It makes me think about a question I gave you a while back, temperature of the blood, or I thought, should I say core temperature, or should I say temperature of the blood? It's almost the same thing. Sure, clearly blood out in your fingers could be cooler, peripheral receptors. But core temperature is what's being monitored by negative feedback. And the sensory pathway, anterior spinal thalamic, it's going to come into the spinal cord, synapse right away, cross, rise the spinal cord and the contralateral pathway. It's going on its way to the thalamus, but also you're going to have branches going to the hypothalamus, because that's the control center for thermoregulation. That's going to tell us to activate autonomic nervous system and somatic nervous systems so that we vasoconstrict when we're cold, or we vasodilate when we're hot, to release thyroid hormone, or release epinephrine, to get your skeletal muscles to shiver, to get your sweat glands to sweat, that kind of thing. So there's our discussion on temperature, and we are at the end of our sensory presentations. I hope you get a chance to view these. Those of you that find these helpful anyway, to view them before class so we can have a nice discussion about sensory physiology next week. So take care of everybody. I appreciate how hard you work and how motivated you are to learn. And I love that about you guys. So take care. I'll see you next time.